The evening at Bella Vita, an upscale Italian restaurant, was buzzing with energy. The soft hum of conversations mixed with the clinking of glasses and the aroma of freshly baked bread filled the air. Candlelight flickered on each table, casting a warm glow that made the place feel cozy despite its fancy vibe. It was one of those nights where everything seemed perfect. Well, almost everything. In the corner of the dining room sat an elderly black woman, her presence calm but dignified. She wore a simple yet elegant outfit, a dark blouse paired with a pearl necklace, and carried herself with quiet grace. Her name wasn't important right now. What mattered was the reason she had come here tonight. This was her tradition, something she did every year without fail. Tonight marked the anniversary of her late husband's passing, and this restaurant held special memories for them both. They used to visit it together back when he was still alive, sharing laughter over plates of spaghetti and stories over cups of espresso. Now she came alone, keeping his memory alive in her own way. As she opened the menu, her hands trembled slightly, not out of nervousness but from age. Still, her eyes scanned the pages carefully, taking in the descriptions of dishes, written in fancy fonts. She wanted to order something meaningful tonight, maybe even recreate the meal they'd shared during their last visit. But before she could decide, a young waiter approached her table. His name tag read, Ryan, and while his smile looked polite enough, there was something off about it, like it didn't quite match the tone of his voice. "Hi there," Ryan said, pulling out his notepad. "Can I help you with anything? Some of these items might be a bit tricky if you're not familiar with fine dining." He paused for a second, then added with a chuckle, "You know, it's pretty high-end stuff. Probably over your head." The comment hit like a splash of cold water. The woman blinked, her fingers pausing mid-air as she processed what he'd just said. Over my head, she thought, surprised by the assumption. She wasn't new to nice restaurants. In fact, she knew more about good food than most people twice her age. But Ryan's words stung nonetheless. Instead of snapping back or showing anger, though, she simply nodded politely. "Thank you," she replied softly, "but I think I'll manage." Ryan didn't seem to notice her reaction, or maybe he chose to ignore it. Either way, he kept talking, making jokes under his breath that were loud enough for nearby tables to overhear. "Maybe stick to water instead of champagne," he quipped, glancing around as if expecting others to laugh along. A few customers exchanged awkward glances, unsure whether to intervene or let it slide. Meanwhile, the elderly woman felt her cheeks grow warm with embarrassment. She tried to focus on the menu again, determined not to let Ryan ruin her evening. After all, this wasn't just any dinner. It was a tribute to someone she loved deeply. Still, his dismissive attitude lingered in the background, making it hard to concentrate. Why would he say such things? Did he really think less of her because of how she looked? Or was he just careless, tossing out comments without considering their impact? At another table nearby, a couple glanced over, clearly uncomfortable with the situation. One of them leaned toward the other and whispered, "Is he always like this?" The other shrugged, shaking their head. No one stepped in to defend the woman, but the tension in the air grew thicker with every word Ryan spoke. Meanwhile, a senior staff member named Lisa noticed the exchange from across the room. Something about Ryan's demeanor struck her as odd, so she decided to keep an eye on him. If nothing else, she figured she'd check in with the guest later to make sure everything was okay. Little did anyone know this seemingly ordinary night was about to take a dramatic turn, one that would leave everyone involved questioning their assumptions and learning valuable lessons about respect, dignity, and the power of humility. 3. Elderly woman tried to brush off the waiter's comments and focus on her meal, but it wasn't easy. Every time Ryan came back to her table, his tone carried that same edge of condescension. When she asked for recommendations, he suggested only the cheapest items on the menu, as if assuming she couldn't afford anything better. "This pasta is great," he said with a smirk, pointing to one of the lower-priced dishes. "And hey, it's filling too. You can't go wrong with carbs, right?" His attempt at humor landed flat, at least with her. She gave him a tight smile, not wanting to cause a scene, but inside she felt a mix of frustration and sadness. Here she was, trying to enjoy a meaningful evening in a place filled with memories, and this young man seemed determined to make her feel out of place. When the time came to order, she deliberately chose something more expensive, a seafood risotto, that had been her late husband's favorite. Ryan raised an eyebrow when she told him her choice. "Are you sure about that?" he asked, his voice dripping with skepticism. "It's quite pricey. Maybe you'd be happier with something simpler." By now, the woman's patience was wearing thin. She looked him straight in the eye and replied firmly, "I'm sure. Thank you." Her tone left no room for further discussion, and Ryan finally walked away, though not without muttering under his breath, "All right, your call." At surrounding tables, other diners began to take notice. A family of 4 sitting nearby exchanged glances after hearing Ryan's remarks. The mother leaned over to her husband and whispered, "Doesn't he realize how rude he sounds?" The father shrugged, shaking his head. Across the aisle, a couple in their 30s looked uncomfortable, their eyes darting between the elderly woman and the waiter. One of them muttered quietly, "That's just not okay." Despite the growing tension, the woman remained composed. She reminded herself why she was here, to honor her husband and hold on to the joy they'd shared in this very spot. Still, Ryan's attitude gnawed at her. It wasn't just about the money or the food. It was the way he treated her like she didn't belong, as if her presence in the restaurant somehow disrupted the polished atmosphere. As the minutes ticked by, Lisa, the senior staff member who'd been observing from afar, decided it was time to step in. She approached the woman's table with a warm smile, her demeanor professional yet kind. "Good evening, ma'am," she said gently. "I hope everything is going well for you tonight. I noticed your server might have been a little difficult. Is there anything I can do to assist you?" The elderly woman hesitated for a moment, then nodded. "Thank you," she said softly. "It's fine, really, but yes, I'd appreciate your help." Lisa quickly took charge, ensuring the woman's order was processed smoothly. As she did, she shot a sharp glance toward Ryan, who was busy chatting casually with another group of customers. Lisa's expression said it all. "We need to talk." After making sure the guest was comfortable, Lisa pulled Ryan aside near the kitchen entrance. Her voice was low but firm. "What exactly is going on with that table?" she demanded, gesturing subtly toward the elderly woman. Ryan shrugged, clearly not grasping the seriousness of the situation. "Nothing major," he said dismissively. "She's just an older lady, probably not used to places like this. I was just trying to help her out, you know? Keep things simple." Lisa stared at him, disbelief etched across her face. "Simple? That's not what I saw. You were talking down to her, Ryan, making assumptions about what she could or couldn't handle. Do you even know who she is?" Ryan blinked, caught off guard by the question. "Who she is? What does that matter? She's just a customer." Lisa sighed deeply, pinching the bridge of her nose. "Let me put it this way," she said slowly. "You're walking a very thin line here. If I hear one more complaint about how you're treating guests, especially ones like her, we're going to have a much bigger problem. Got it?" Ryan nodded quickly, though his expression suggested he still didn't fully understand the weight of the situation. Lisa gave him a final warning glare before heading back to check on the woman again. Meanwhile, the elderly woman sat quietly, sipping her water and waiting for her meal. Though Lisa's intervention had eased some of the tension, the damage had already been done. She couldn't shake the feeling that she was being judged, not just by Ryan, but perhaps by others in the restaurant too. The thought weighed heavily on her heart, overshadowing the happy memories she'd come to celebrate. Unbeknownst to anyone, however, the evening was far from over. Little did Ryan or the rest of the staff know that this seemingly ordinary night would soon take a turn none of them could have anticipated. And when it did, it would leave everyone involved questioning their actions, their attitudes, and the true meaning of respect. The restaurant buzzed with its usual Friday night energy, but the tension at the elderly woman's table lingered like an unwelcome shadow. Lisa, the senior staff member, had done her best to smooth things over, but the damage was already done. The woman sat quietly, her hands resting on the edge of the table as she stared at the flickering candlelight. Her mind wandered back to happier times, memories of laughter and shared meals with her late husband, but Ryan's dismissive words kept creeping in, pulling her back to the present. Nearby, Ryan seemed oblivious to the storm brewing around him. He moved between tables with practiced ease, cracking jokes with younger customers and chatting casually with coworkers. To anyone watching, he appeared confident, even charming. But Lisa's sharp reprimand earlier had planted a seed of unease in his mind. He glanced occasionally toward the elderly woman's table, wondering if he'd pushed things too far. Still, he brushed it off, telling himself she probably hadn't even noticed. Lisa, however, wasn't about to let the matter slide. After ensuring the woman's order was being prepared correctly, she made her way to the kitchen to speak with the head chef. "Keep an eye on table 7, she instructed, lowering her voice so only the chef could hear. "We need everything perfect for her tonight, and make sure Ryan stays away from that table. I'll handle it personally." The chef nodded, understanding the gravity of the situation without needing further explanation. In a place like Bella Vita, reputation mattered more than anything else. One bad experience could ripple outward, tarnishing the restaurant's image and alienating loyal customers. Lisa knew this all too well, and she wasn't about to let Ryan's carelessness jeopardize what they'd worked so hard to build. As dessert approached, the atmosphere in the dining room shifted unexpectedly. The front door swung open, drawing everyone's attention. A tall, sharply dressed man entered, flanked by 2 assistants carrying folders and tablets. His presence commanded immediate respect. Servers straightened their postures, and conversations briefly hushed as he scanned the room. There was something magnetic about him, a quiet confidence that demanded acknowledgement. He strode directly toward the elderly woman's table, his steps purposeful yet unhurried. When he reached her, he leaned down and kissed her cheek affectionately. "Happy anniversary, Mom," he said softly, his voice warm with love. The woman's face lit up instantly, her earlier discomfort melting away as she smiled at him. They exchanged a few quiet words, their bond evident in every glance and gesture. Ryan froze where he stood, his tray of drinks suddenly feeling heavier in his hands. Panic bubbled up inside him as realization dawned. This wasn't just some random customer. He was looking at the owner of Bella Vita, the man who employed him, who paid his salary, who had built this entire establishment from the ground up. And now, here he was, standing beside the very woman Ryan had mocked and belittled all evening. The man turned his attention to Ryan, his expression calm but piercing. "You've been serving my mother tonight, correct?" he asked, his tone deceptively soft. Ryan swallowed hard, nodding nervously. "Yes, sir," he stammered, his voice barely above a whisper. "I didn't mean..." "Mean what?" the man interrupted, his voice cutting through the air like a blade. "Did you think she wouldn't tell me how you treated her? Or did you assume no one would care because of her age? Because of the color of her skin?" The words hung heavy in the silence that followed. Other diners turned to watch, their curiosity piqued by the unfolding drama. Ryan's face flushed red, his eyes darting around the room as if searching for an escape. He opened his mouth to respond, but no sound came out. What could he say? Every excuse felt hollow, every justification meaningless. The elderly woman rose from her seat, placing a gentle hand on her son's arm. "Let's not make a scene, sweetheart," she murmured, her voice steady despite the weight of the moment. She looked at Ryan, her expression neither angry nor bitter, but filled with quiet disappointment. "We're all human," she added, softly. "We all make mistakes. I hope you'll learn from yours." Her words struck a chord not just with Ryan, but with everyone within earshot. For Ryan, they were both a lifeline and a wake-up call. He realized, perhaps for the first time, the impact of his actions. It wasn't just about losing a job or facing consequences. It was about recognizing the humanity in others and treating them with the dignity they deserved. The man gave Ryan one last measured look before turning back to his mother. "Let's finish our evening properly," he said, guiding her back to her seat. As they settled in, the rest of the staff sprang into action, determined to salvage the night. Desserts were served promptly, refills offered generously, and smiles exchanged warmly. Even Ryan, shaken as he was, threw himself into his work with newfound humility, going above and beyond to ensure every guest felt valued. For the elderly woman, the evening ended on a bittersweet note. Though hurt by Ryan's initial behavior, she found comfort in knowing her son had created a business rooted in principles of kindness and respect. As she left the restaurant arm in arm with her child, she reflected on the importance of forgiveness and the power of standing up for what's right. Back inside, Ryan watched them go, vowing never to underestimate anyone ever again. Sometimes, life teaches its toughest lessons in the most unexpected ways. The restaurant buzzed with an uneasy energy as the tall, sharply dressed man walked in. His presence was commanding, and it wasn't just because of his tailored suit or the polished leather shoes that clicked softly against the tiled floor. It was the way he carried himself, calm, confident, but with an edge that demanded attention. Everyone in the room seemed to pause for a moment, their conversations dipping into silence as they turned to see who had entered. He scanned the room briefly, before his eyes landed on the elderly woman sitting quietly at her table. A smile spread across his face, a genuine one full of warmth and affection. He didn't hesitate. He strode directly toward her, his steps steady and purposeful. When he reached her side, he leaned down and kissed her cheek gently. "Happy anniversary, Mom," he said, his voice soft but filled with emotion. The woman's face lit up instantly, her earlier tension melting away like frost under sunlight. She smiled back at him, reaching up to pat his hand. "Thank you, sweetheart," she replied, her tone laced with gratitude. They exchanged a few quiet words, their connection clear to anyone watching. It was obvious how much they cared for each other, and the love between them felt almost tangible, like a thread weaving through the air. But while the scene was heartwarming, it sent a ripple of unease through the staff, and especially Ryan. From across the room, Ryan watched the interaction, his stomach sinking with every passing second. At first he thought maybe the man was just another guest dropping by to greet the elderly woman. But then something clicked. The way the server straightened up, the hushed whispers spreading among the staff, it all pointed to one thing. This wasn't just any visitor. This was someone important. Someone who owned the place. Ryan's mind raced as he pieced it together. The elderly woman he'd mocked, the one he'd treated so dismissively all evening, she wasn't just a customer. She was his mother. And the man standing beside her? Her son. The owner of Bella Vita. The realization hit Ryan like a punch to the gut. His knees felt weak, his palms clammy. For a moment he considered slipping away, disappearing into the kitchen, or finding some excuse to avoid what was coming next. But there was no escape now. The man was already heading his way. When the owner approached, Ryan's heart pounded so loudly he could barely hear anything else. Every step the man took felt heavier than the last, until finally, he stopped in front of Ryan. His expression was calm, almost too calm, which somehow made it worse. "You've been serving my mother tonight, correct?" he asked, his voice smooth but sharp enough to cut glass. Ryan nodded quickly, his throat dry. Yes, sir," he stammered, clutching his notepad tightly in his trembling hands. I didn't mean any disrespect, I swear." "Didn't mean any disrespect," the man repeated, raising an eyebrow. His tone shifted slightly, becoming colder. "Then what exactly did you mean when you suggested she stick to water instead of ordering champagne? Or when you implied she wouldn't understand the menu because it was too fancy for her?" Each word landed like a hammer blow, shattering whatever defenses Ryan had tried to build. He opened his mouth to respond, but nothing came out. How could he explain himself when everything he'd done sounded even worse when laid bare like this? Nearby, diners began to take notice, craning their necks to catch glimpses of the confrontation. Some looked sympathetic, shaking their heads at Ryan's predicament. Others wore expressions of disapproval, clearly siding with the elderly woman and her. "Kei-san," whispers rippled through the crowd, snippets of conversation drifting through the air. Did you hear what happened? One patron murmured to another. Poor lady. Can't believe he talked to her like that. The elderly woman herself stood, nearby, her arm linked with her son's. She didn't look angry, at least not outwardly. Instead, there was a deep sadness in her eyes, a weariness that spoke volumes about the toll of the evening. She glanced at Ryan, her gaze steady but kind. We're all human, she said softly, almost to herself. And we all make mistakes, her. Words hung in the air, simple yet powerful. They weren't just directed at Ryan, they seemed to care. The confrontation between the owner and Ryan left a lasting impression on everyone in the restaurant. While the elderly woman and her son returned to their table, sharing quiet laughter and reminiscing about old memories, Ryan stood frozen in place, his mind racing with thoughts of what had just unfolded. The weight of the owner's words pressed down on him like a boulder he couldn't shake off. He replayed the entire evening in his head, the careless comments, the dismissive tone, the assumptions he'd made. And each memory felt heavier than the last. Nearby, other diners began whispering among themselves, their voices low but tinged with emotion. Some expressed sympathy for the elderly woman, shaking their heads at how she'd been treated. It's unbelievable, one man muttered to his wife. She came here to celebrate something important, and that waiter acted like she didn't deserve to be here. Others nodded in agreement, while a few shot disapproving glances in Ryan's direction. Lisa, the senior staff member who had intervened earlier, approached Ryan cautiously. She could see the shame written all over his face, his slumped shoulders, his downcast eyes, the way his hands trembled slightly as he clutched his notepad. Are you okay? She asked softly, her tone less accusatory this time and more concerned. Ryan hesitated before answering. I don't know, he admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. I messed up big time, didn't I? Lisa sighed, crossing her arms as she studied him. Yeah, you did, but messing up isn't the end of the world. What matters now is what you do next. Her words struck a chord with Ryan. He knew she was right. This wasn't just about losing his job or facing consequences. It was about learning from his mistakes and making sure he never repeated them. For the first time, he realized how much power his words and actions held. Treating someone poorly didn't just hurt them, it affected everyone around them, creating ripples that spread far beyond what he'd ever imagined. Determined to make amends, Ryan threw himself into his work with a newfound sense of purpose. He started by checking in on the elderly woman's table again, this time with genuine humility. Ma'am, he said quietly, keeping his distance out of respect, but making sure she heard him. I want to apologize for how I treated you earlier. It was wrong, and I'm truly sorry. The woman looked up at him, her expression softening. She didn't say anything immediately, studying him for a moment as if weighing whether his apology was sincere. Finally, she gave a small nod. Thank you, she replied simply, her voice calm but firm. I appreciate it. Though her response was brief, it meant everything to Ryan. It was a chance, a starting point for him to prove he could change. Over the rest of his shift, he worked harder than ever, ensuring every guest felt valued and respected. When a family struggled to decide on an appetizer, he patiently walked them through the options without any hint of condescension. When a couple celebrating their anniversary needed help choosing wine, he offered thoughtful recommendations instead of rushing them. By the end of the night, several customers complimented his service, unaware of the transformation he'd undergone in such a short span of time. Meanwhile, the elderly woman and her son enjoyed their evening, savoring dessert and sharing stories under the soft glow of candlelight. The tension that had clouded the earlier part of the meal had lifted, replaced by warmth and laughter. At one point, the son leaned back in his chair, watching the bustling activity around them. You know, he said to his mother, tonight reminded me why we opened this place in the first place. His mother smiled, raising an eyebrow. Oh, and why is that? To bring people together, he replied. To create moments they'll remember, not just because of the food, but because of how they feel when they're here. Respect, kindness, dignity, that's what matters most. She nodded, her smile widening. And tonight, You showed exactly what those values mean. As the evening wound down, the restaurant slowly emptied out. Patrons gathered their coats and bags, exchanging polite goodbyes with the staff. The elderly woman rose from her seat, slipping her purse over her shoulder. Her son accompanied her to the door, his arm wrapped protectively around hers. Before stepping outside, she paused and turned back toward the dining room. Her gaze swept across the space, lingering briefly on Ryan, who was busy clearing tables. Their eyes met for a moment, and she gave him a slight nod, a silent acknowledgement of his efforts. Ryan felt a lump rise in his throat. He didn't expect forgiveness so soon, but the gesture meant more to him than she probably realized. It wasn't just an acknowledgement of his apology. It was a reminder that second chances were possible, if you were willing to earn them. Outside, the cool night air greeted the mother and son as they stepped onto the sidewalk. Arm in arm, they walked toward their car, the sound of distant traffic mingling with their quiet conversation. For the elderly woman, the evening had been a mix of emotions: hurt, disappointment, but ultimately hope. Hope that even in moments of misunderstanding, people could grow and learn from their mistakes. Back inside the restaurant, Ryan watched them go, his chest tight with a mixture of regret and determination. As he stacked chairs and wiped down tables, he reflected on the lessons he'd learned that night. He thought about the elderly woman's grace, her son's firmness, and the countless faces of strangers who deserved better than what he'd given them earlier. Most importantly, he thought about how easy it was to underestimate someone, to judge them based on appearances, and how dangerous that mindset could be. By the time he locked up the restaurant and headed home, Ryan knew one thing for certain: he would never look at another person the same way again. Sometimes life teaches its toughest lessons in the most unexpected ways, and sometimes those lessons are exactly what we need to become better versions of ourselves. The night at Bella Vita finally drew to a close, but the events of the evening lingered in everyone's minds long after the last guest had left. Ryan stayed behind, helping the cleaning crew tidy up the dining room. Normally, he would have rushed through this part of his shift, eager to get home and unwind. But tonight was different. Every task felt heavier: stacking chairs, wiping tables, sweeping floors. It all gave him time to think. And thinking was exactly what he needed to do. As he worked, snippets of the evening replayed in his head like a broken record. The elderly woman's quiet dignity when he'd mocked her. The owner's piercing gaze as he called him out in front of everyone. Even the whispered comments from other diners stung now, each one a reminder of how far he'd fallen short. He couldn't shake the image of the woman's face when she accepted his apology. Her calm nod, her measured words. There was no anger. In her response, only a quiet strength that spoke volumes about who she was as a person. Ryan stopped mid-wipe, leaning against a table for support. His reflection stared back at him from the polished surface, and for the first time in years, he didn't recognize the man looking back. Who was this guy? Someone who judged others so quickly, who dismissed people without really seeing them. That wasn't the version of himself he wanted to be. Nearby, Lisa was organizing menus at the host stand. She glanced over at Ryan, noticing the pensive look on his face. "You holding up okay?" she asked, her tone softer than earlier but still probing. Ryan hesitated before answering. "I don't know," he admitted, running a hand through his hair. "I keep thinking about everything. I did wrong tonight, about how I treated her, how I almost ruined her evening." Lisa nodded, setting down the stack of menus. "It's hard facing your mistakes," she said simply, "but it's also where real growth happens. You can't change what happened, but you can decide what you're going to do moving forward." Her words hit home. Ryan realized she was right. He couldn't undo the past, but he could make sure it didn't define his future. For the rest of the night, he poured every ounce of energy into his work, determined to finish strong. When the cleaning crew finished mopping the floors, he volunteered to take out the trash, something he usually avoided. When Lisa double-checked the reservation book, he offered to help organize receipts. By the time they locked up the restaurant, together, Ryan felt a small sense of accomplishment. Not because he'd fixed everything, but because he'd taken the first step toward making amends. The next morning, the staff gathered for their weekly meeting. The owner stood at the front of the room, his expression serious but not unkind. "Last night was challenging," he began, addressing the group. "And while I won't go into specifics, I want to use this moment to remind everyone why we're here. This isn't just a restaurant, it's a place where people come to celebrate, to connect, to create memories. Every single person who walks through those doors deserves to feel valued and respected, no matter who they are or where they come from." He paused, letting his words sink in before continuing. "Respect isn't just a policy, it's a mindset. It's about seeing people for who they truly are, not making assumptions based on appearances. If we lose sight of that, we lose sight of what makes this place special." The room fell silent, the weight of his message hanging heavy in the air. Ryan sat quietly, his hands clasped tightly in his lap. He knew the owner's words were meant for everyone, but they felt especially directed at him. It wasn't just a lecture. It was a call to action, a challenge to be better. After the meeting ended, the owner pulled Ryan aside. "I want to talk to you about something," he said. The weeks that followed the incident at Bella Vita brought a noticeable shift in Ryan's demeanor. The once brash and dismissive waiter had transformed into someone who approached his job with genuine care and humility. It wasn't just about avoiding trouble or impressing the boss, it was deeper than that. Ryan had begun to see his role not as a mere taskmaster serving plates, but as an opportunity to make people feel seen, valued, and respected. Every morning, as he tied on his apron and stepped into the bustling kitchen, Ryan reminded himself of the lessons he'd learned. He thought about the elderly woman whose quiet grace had taught him more in one evening than years of working in restaurants ever had. He remembered the owner's firm yet fair words during their private conversation, the emphasis on respect, dignity, and second chances. Most importantly, he carried with him the realization that every person who walked through those doors carried their own stories, struggles, and joys. It was his job to honor that. One afternoon, as the lunch rush began to wind down, a young family entered the restaurant. There was a harried-looking mother juggling a diaper bag and a toddler, while her teenage son trailed behind, scrolling absent-mindedly on his phone. They didn't fit the polished image of Bella Vita's typical clientele, and Ryan could sense some of the other servers exchanging skeptical glances. But instead of letting old habits creep back in, Ryan stepped forward with a warm smile. "Welcome," he said brightly. "Let me show you to your table." As they settled in, Ryan took note of the little details. The way the mother fussed over her youngest child, trying to keep him entertained. The awkwardness of the teenager, clearly reluctant to be there. Instead of rushing them, Ryan gave them space, checking in periodically with gentle questions. "Would your little one like crayons to color with?" he asked, pulling out a small pack from his pocket. The mother looked up, surprised but grateful. "That would be wonderful, thank you," she replied, her shoulders relaxing slightly. By the end of the meal, the family seemed more at ease. The toddler giggled as he scribbled on the paper menu Ryan had provided, and even the teenager cracked a smile when Ryan joked about how tough it must be to have a younger sibling. As they prepared to leave, the mother stopped Ryan by the door. "Thank you for making our visit so pleasant," she said sincerely. "We don't usually eat at places like this, but today felt nice." Ryan smiled, feeling a warmth spread through his chest. "It's my pleasure," he replied. "I'm glad you enjoyed it." Word of Ryan's improved attitude spread among the staff, earning him nods of approval from colleagues who had previously dismissed him as careless. Lisa, in particular, noticed the change. One evening, as they worked side by side restocking napkins and silverware, she leaned over and said, "You've really turned things around, haven't you?" Ryan shrugged modestly, though a hint of pride flickered in his eyes. "Trying to, at least," he admitted. "Still got a lot to learn, but I'm getting there." Lisa nodded approvingly. "It shows. People notice when you actually care. And trust me, guests can tell the difference between someone going through the motions and someone who genuinely wants to make their day better. Her words stuck with Ryan long after their shift ended. He realized that the key to being good at his job wasn't just about technical skills or efficiency. It was about connection, about creating moments that made people feel welcome, no matter where they came from or what they looked like. A few months later, the elderly woman returned to Bella Vita once again. This time she arrived alone, dressed in the same elegant yet understated style Ryan remembered. His heart skipped a beat when he saw her walk in, but this time he greeted her with confidence rather than apprehension. "Good evening, ma'am," he said warmly. "It's good to see you again." She smiled, her eyes twinkling with recognition. "And you, young man," she replied. "I hope I'm not too much trouble." "Never," Ryan assured her, guiding her to a cozy corner table near the window. Throughout the evening, he made sure her experience was flawless, anticipating her needs without being intrusive. When dessert arrived, a slice of tiramisu she'd ordered, he noticed her pause, lost in thought. "Is everything all right?" he asked gently. She looked up, her expression soft. "This was my husband's favorite," she said quietly. "He used to say it tasted like happiness." Ryan nodded, touched by her words. "Then I hope it brings you some tonight," he said sincerely. When the check arrived, she handed Ryan a folded piece of paper along with her payment. Curious, he opened it after she left. Inside was a short note written in neat handwriting. "Thank you for reminding me that people can grow and change. Your kindness has meant more than you know." Ryan stared at the note for a long moment, his throat tightening with emotion. He hadn't expected gratitude, not after everything, but here it was, proof that his efforts mattered. That forgiveness and understanding were possible if you were willing to earn them. As the months passed, Ryan continued to grow both personally and professionally. The lessons he'd learned weren't confined to the walls of Bella Vita. They spilled over into his everyday life. He found himself more patient with strangers, more empathetic toward others' struggles. Even outside of work, he carried the mindset of seeing people for who they truly were rather than jumping to conclusions based on appearances. One evening, as he locked up the restaurant and stepped into the cool night air, Ryan paused to take in the quiet stillness of the street. The city buzzed faintly in the distance, but for a moment it felt like the world stood still. He thought about how far he'd come since that fateful night when his assumptions and carelessness had nearly cost him everything. Back then, he'd been blind to the humanity of those around him. Now he saw it everywhere, in the laughter of families sharing meals, in the gratitude of customers leaving satisfied, in the camaraderie of co-workers striving to create something meaningful together. Ryan knew he wasn't perfect. There were days when old habits threatened to resurface, when frustration bubbled under the surface. But he also knew he was moving in the right direction. Life had given him a second chance, and he wasn't about to waste it. The months rolled, and Bella Vita continued to thrive. The restaurant wasn't just a place where people came for good food. It had become something more. It was a space where lives intertwined, where stories unfolded over plates of pasta and glasses of wine. For Ryan, the transformation within its walls mirrored the changes happening inside him. He'd gone from being someone who judged others too quickly to someone who took the time to understand them, and it showed in everything he did. One crisp autumn evening, as golden leaves swirled outside the restaurant's windows, the owner gathered the staff for a special announcement. Everyone stood around, curious about what this meeting might bring. When the owner stepped forward, his expression was thoughtful but warm. "I wanted to take a moment to thank all of you," he began, scanning the room. "Every day we have the chance to make someone's experience here memorable, to create moments they'll carry with them long after they leave. That's not easy work, but each of you does it in your own way." He paused, letting his words sink in before continuing. "Lately, I've noticed something different, not just in how smoothly things are running, but in the way our guests talk about their visits. They mention the kindness they feel when they walk through the door. They talk about being treated like family, even if it's their first time here." His gaze lingered on Ryan for a beat longer than anyone else. "And That's because of all of you. Because you've embraced what makes this place special: respect, empathy, and connection. The room erupted into quiet applause, smiles spreading across faces. Ryan felt a lump rise in his throat. He knew the owner's words weren't directed solely at him, but they resonated deeply. Months ago, he wouldn't have believed he could be part of such a team, or that he'd ever earn praise for doing his job well. But now, standing among colleagues who had seen him at his worst and watched him grow, he felt a sense of belonging he hadn't known he needed. Later that night, as the restaurant emptied out and the staff cleaned up, Ryan found himself lingering near the host stand. Lisa joined him, folding menus methodically while humming softly under her breath. "You know," she said after a moment, glancing sideways at him, "you've come a long way since last winter." Ryan chuckled nervously, rubbing the back of his neck. "Yeah, I guess I have. Still got a lot to learn, though." Lisa shook her head, smiling. "Don't sell yourself short. Look at how far you've come. You're not the same person who walked in here 6 months ago. And honestly, neither is this place." Her comment caught Ryan off guard. "What do you mean?" "I mean," Lisa explained, setting down the last menu, "that change starts with one person. One decision to do better. And when you changed, it kind of rippled out. People notice. You set an example. Not just for the customers, but for us too." Ryan blinked, surprised by her words. He hadn't thought about it that way. To him, his growth had been personal, a way to make amends for past mistakes. But hearing Lisa frame it as something bigger, something that affected everyone around him, made him realize the true weight of his journey. A few weeks later, the elderly woman returned once again. This time, she brought along a small group of friends, filling a table near the center of the dining room. As Ryan approached to greet her, she greeted,